Welcome to Island Voices, examining the incredible history of the island of Manhattan and talking to the people who have made it incredible. If you're enjoying us on YouTube, please be sure to hit the red subscribe button at the bottom right of your screen, and welcome aboard. Folks, most or all of us pay attention to the entertainment business, I think, whether people want to admit it or not. Whether you're a stockbroker, a cop, a teacher, or an actor. I mean, who doesn't listen to music or go to the movies or love the theater? And I think entertainment as a product has really become much of what companies like U.S. Steel are not anymore. I mean, to our economy, it's much of what we put out in this country. And if you're in this greater New Netherlands tri-state region, it's pretty much unavoidable. I mean, it's kind of part of the deal. But people don't always pay much attention to the people who report on that business. But if you think about it, without them, most of us really wouldn't have much of a window into that world, would we? Well, fortunately for us, our guest today not only heads one of the most widely read entertainment columns in the center of the universe, he also happens to be a highly prolific author. Growing up in the suburban shadow of the greatest city on earth, he was enchanted by this magic of this place, by this business of show. He was taken by its luster, and as our show does, eventually came to focus on the critical element within it, the characters who make that history. And he has penned biographies on classic entertainers, including Art Carney, Joey Bishop, Bobby Darin, Raymond Burr, Red Foxx, and more recently, Ringo Starr, which we will talk about. He has covered entertainment and television at the New York Post nearly since the Dinkin administration. So yes, he is already part of this incredible history of this incredible place. He respects the business and the people that make it tick. And I think it still inspires him the way it did that little kid growing up in northern New Jersey. He is the purveyor of the Starr Report, but today he is our star. He is the star. He is a gentleman and a scholar, and we are extremely privileged and honored to have him as our guest, my friend, entertainment columnist, Michael Starr. Welcome, Mynheer.
Thanks, Chance. Thanks for having me.
Very nice to see you.
You too.
So we talked a little bit about this. I mean, everybody pays attention to entertainment, right? I mean, have you ever met somebody who just doesn't pay attention?
No. And I think particularly television, which is now with streaming and like everybody watches television. You know, in the old days, everybody watched television, but it's different, a little different from movies in the fact that it's in your living room every day, 24 hours, 24/7. And now with streaming networks, there's just so much content out there.
People have really changed the way they watch television.
They have.
Vastly.
Yes. And even the networks now, when they used to be, you know, live, what they called live plus same day ratings, like 18 million people watched Thursday night's episode of St. Elsewhere. I'm, making that up.
Right.
But now it's all changed. Now it's because people aren't watching as much programming live anymore. They're watching it on their DVR or they're watching it streaming, 5 days later.
Right.
It's totally changed the way that ratings are measured for television shows.
I want to talk about the history of television for a minute. In fact, we talk about the history of broadcast entertainment in general, because it too, like so many other things, really did start right here in New York. If you go back to, I'm sure you know this story, where essentially network broadcasting started with NBC as a radio concern. Back around 1926, they started acquiring stations. It was actually RCA acquiring stations under the parent company of General Electric. And when they compiled a handful, 2 or 3 or 4 key stations and headquartered them in New York, they created the National Broadcasting Corporation. And from that, do you know this red and blue network thing?
Yes.
So tell us about that a little bit.
Well, I think WNB, it wasn't even called WNBC at first. I think it was WMBT, or maybe that was the red and the blue. They covered certain parts of the country. And I believe that one of those was spun off into what eventually became ABC.
So ABC, I believe, so you had red and blue. Red was the paid programming. The blue was more like newsreels and public service announcements and things. They morphed that off, and that became the American Broadcasting Corporation. That became ABC, and then Paley had already started the Columbia Broadcasting System on another platform. So, but there you have it. And by the way, one of those key stations was purchased from AT&T, and I think as much as it's now, that's 100 years ago, right? But as much as it's changed, think about those players we just mentioned: General Electric, NBC, ABC, CBS, and AT&T.
Right.
They're all right in the center of the business today. Isn't it amazing how that happens?
More things change, the more they stay the same. It's true.
Exactly.
It's true.
So look, you also, in April, you ran a headline: putrid Oscar ratings throw the telecast future in doubt. It was pretty bad. And you gave the numbers.
Yeah.
I think it was the first time, you said it was the first time ever that viewership has fallen below 10 million people.
Right. Correct.
Since how long? Like, how long have they been keeping those?
Well, they've been keeping
records?
the Oscar ratings go back to the early 60s. So,
wow.
Yeah. So or maybe late 60s, early 70s. So it's a long time.
So with all the more people and the more television screens in the world and in the country and in the world, over a 50+ year period, the least amount of people watched it this past year.
Yeah. I mean, you're talking about a telecast that would get 50, 60 million people at its peak.
You said the one in 98, hosted by Billy Crystal, was 60 million viewers.
Yeah. I mean, it was event television. And I don't know if it's the fact that there are now so many award shows on, SAG Awards, People's Choice Awards, the Golden Globes, the Emmys and the Oscar. There's just so many award shows. I don't know if it's viewer fatigue because the ratings have been falling now for quite a while, or was it the pandemic? I don't think so. I think people are just getting a little tired of award shows, and I don't know. It's just that there's so much to see out there, and to put all your eggs in one basket for one specific award show. The movies weren't, because of the pandemic, I guess for the Oscars, the movies weren't as widely available. People were watching them at home. It wasn't the same as going to the theater. The feeling wasn't there. I don't know. It's just, I mean, you're in the business. What do you think?
Well, I think this year was a one-off. I think it has a lot to do with the fact that no one went to a movie for a year.
Yeah.
I mean, you couldn't. So I think the mindset, when I think of Oscars, when I heard the Oscars coming up, I'm like, well, they can't have Oscars. We didn't have movies. And I'm like, oh, we did kind of have movies, but they were like DVDs. And that's, to me anyway, that's not the movies,
Right.
You think of the classic, the curtain opening up and the big premiere and all that. None of that happened for over a year. So I think that has something to do with maybe our age bracket. But then I do think you're right that the younger kids, they do have a award show overload to some extent, like, the ESPYs. And then there's like a award
MTV Movie Awards.
You can't keep up with it. And if you're 12 or 22, you don't know the difference. I mean, I know people do. I don't mean to.
No, I know what you mean.
Disparage anyone, but there's just, you've grown up and there's 18 different award shows and they kind of dilute each other.
Back in when we were, coming of age, it was the Oscars, the Emmys, and the Grammys to a lesser extent. But and the Tonys were never popular as a ratings draw, but they were on every year.
There's a little niche thing that some people watched, but that was it. You didn't have these other, it just kind of floods the market. All
so,
right.
and I just think there's a little overload of that, and you factor in there were other socio-political factors. People don't want to see, maybe they don't want to see a star come on, accept an award and go off on a rant about something political or thereabouts. So I think there's some of that too, but
I definitely think that I just think in general, people are not looking for political views from entertainers because I don't ask my politicians to sing songs for me.
Exactly.
So I don't want to see my entertainers pontificate on politics. It's just not what I'm paying for.
Yeah.
But that does become part of the equation. All right. I wanted to say that as I mentioned in the intro a little bit, I mean, you're a real biographer, Michael. I hadn't been quite aware of how prolific and how extensive your authorship has become as a writer of biographies of, as I said, classic entertainers. I mean, these folks that were Art Carney, who, if anybody doesn't know that, he's one half of the Honeymooners. Him and Jackie Gleason were the Honeymooners. And Bobby Darin, who was an incredible early rock and roll guy. Joey Bishop, he was one of the Rat Pack with Frank Sinatra. Raymond Burr, he was
Mason,
Ironside. Yeah. Red Fox, he was Sanford and Son, and he was an incredible comedian. You really grasp some of the elements of that makes me say that history is cool. I mean, because you get underneath and you peel back the layers, which is what it really seems to be about. And it's really fascinating. Tell us a little bit about being a writer of biographies like that.
These are people that interest me, and I feel that they're part of pop culture history. Perhaps the spotlight hasn't been shining on them as much as it should have. Like, for instance, you mentioned Ringo Starr. I mean, obviously the Beatles, we all know the Beatles, but it was always, everybody was writing about Lennon and McCartney and maybe George Harrison to a lesser extent, but Ringo? No, nobody. I mean, he was the drummer and he sang Yellow Submarine, but nobody really, I think, went in depth into his life and what made him part of, the most popular music group on the planet. I mean, even today, I think, they've been broken up for 50 years now and people still talking about the Beatles.
It really is, to me, what makes any story interesting is when you dig into those characters. I mean, Walter White in Breaking Bad, Carrie Mathison and Saul Berenson in Homeland, Tommy Shelby in Peaky Blinders, Archie Bunker, Hawkeye Pierce. I mean, these are the characters are what makes the story, colors the story and tells the story. And I think that you did an incredible job with Ringo. I started Art Carney, but I'm just a little bit into that. Ringo, not only did you do a great job, first off, there's not another comprehensive biography of Ringo out there. Yours is it. And just for the record, it took me back, man. Like, I was a drummer too. Not so good,
same here. Yeah.
Right. So, and I just identified with Ringo right out of the gate. Now, no, neither one of us are old enough to have grown up with the Beatles, but, it came to me through my aunt who went and saw him at Shea Stadium. So she was like a hardcore. My first movie in the theaters was Yellow Submarine. And it wasn't the first run. It was like this. They came back the next year, but I was like 3 years old. I saw Yellow Submarine. Yeah. So it was right there with me. And man, you nailed it. And some of those moments that you really focused on in the book, like just the time frame of it, you forget how fleeting it was, how they were looking for a drummer in 1963, right? And Ringo, 62. Right. And Ringo was actually the oldest of all of them. He was old, he was like a year older than John. They get Ringo, and you mentioned, like, as the story's happening, that 7 years, the whole thing will be over. Like, it starts and finishes inside of 7 years. Like, from the time they hired him till the time they broke up, that was like 60. Was it 62 or 63?
He started playing with them in 62.
Okay.
And they broke up in 70. So
70. It was 8 years, soup to nuts. And then I'm going through the discography in my mind because I knew every album, but I forgot how close together it was. So they put out Meet the Beatles, and they're touring the United States in the beginning of 1964, right?
Right.
3 years later, they're getting ready to record Sgt. Pepper's. And I'm like, the transformation, just
the growth it's right phenomenal. It's phenomenal. Incredible? You went from, Love Me Do to A Day in the Life or stuff like that. It's incredible. And as I said in the book, it's one of those bar arguments, who was the better drummer? Would they have been, because Ringo replaced Pete Best. Was Pete Best better? Was Ringo better? It doesn't, or would they have been better off with Keith Moon drumming? It doesn't matter. That this is how it played out with Ringo Starr as their drummer, and the sound you hear and the sound that people who are fans of the Beatles love is with Ringo on the drums. So,
Yeah, and I think you did a great job of illustrating that in the book and telling it from all sides. He worked for that type of music. I mean, it fit into that.
Yeah. Yes.
That quartet perfectly. And
right.
And Pete Best did have problems because he was a little more. He may have been a little flashier drummer, but he was not as honed down. He was not quite as professional as Ringo was.
He didn't. I think one, and he would probably tell you this too. Maybe you'll have him on one day. Is that I don't think he meshed that well with the other three. I mean, when they already knew, they were having problems with him, I think, with his personality and maybe some technical stuff with his drumming. And they knew Ringo because he was with Rory Storm, and he was considered at that point if not the best, one of the best drummers in Liverpool. He had been working as a drummer for 3 or 4 years straight, full time, and they knew him. They worked with him in Germany and Hamburg. So when the time came and they wanted to replace him, Pete Best, I think it was really George Harrison who was the most friendliest with Ringo at that point. They knew where to go, and and why wouldn't he join them? They were on their way up and recording in the studio, which a lot of people weren't doing at that point. So,
yeah, I'd say it was a decent career move he made.
Yeah, right. Not a lateral move.
Yeah, definitely. But I love I love that they were incredibly successful in Europe, in England, Germany. They went to Hamburg. They were in Liverpool, but still, I didn't know this. They came to the States because Ed Sullivan sort of ran into them over in England, right? That I had no idea about.
I had seen them in an airport, I think was the story.
And then you say it. America met the Beatles at 8 p.m. Eastern time on February 9th, 1964, when it seemed like the entire country turned their television sets to CBS to watch the Ed Sullivan Show.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles.
I still get chills watching it.
I said I wrote down the exact same note. It gave me chills watching this. And I've seen it, a dozen times, but you sit there and you think, well, look, this is the Ed Sullivan Theater. This is where Letterman recorded all those years. It's that same building. It's the same theater. And then you talk about them staying at the Plaza Hotel, screwing around with Murray the K, who was an old DJ and promoter, going in the horse-drawn carriage in Central Park. And it all really exploded from that moment. It all exploded once they landed in New York.
And you talk about the power of television. I mean, without television, if they had done a live event on radio, yes, I think it would have been popular, but not like this, where people could see them, the whole country could see them all at once in the flesh, playing their own instruments and sing, not singing their own songs, not miming.
And you watch it. I mean, it's how old is it? 50 something years old. How old? 60,
57.
Okay.
Years.
It still has electric level of excitement to it. It's just incredible. You watch every face in that studio. And I also didn't know that only sat 700 people.
Yeah, you wouldn't know it because somebody described it like sort of like an airplane engine roaring as soon as they introduced the Beatles. And with hindsight being 2020, you can watch it now knowing what's coming for them and just appreciate it so much more, and seeing how even physically how they looked in February of 1964 and how they looked when they broke up in 1970 with the longer hair and the mustaches and all that, and to how they were, how Brian Epstein, their manager, had dressed them in matching suits and, you know, and the haircuts and all that. So they were like a brand, first boy band, you know?
Yeah. And it was great because you pointed out that really came from that whole Rory and the Storm group.
Yes.
They really influenced that style.
Yes, they did. And even Ringo, I mean, it was really like the first big band that had one of their members, not Ringo. Like, where did that name come from? Was it John, Paul? If it would have been John, Paul, George, and Pete,
right?
Yeah, they would have probably been. But it was just so novel at the time to have that kind of group writing and singing their own songs with a drummer with not even his real name, with wearing rings on his fingers, and it's just incredible.
Right. And then just the whole way they sort of crafted the whole band, John, Paul, George, using their names. And Ringo, who was Richie Starkey, everybody called him Richie.
Right.
He wasn't Ringo, but they came up with the name because he liked Westerns.
Yes.
Right. He got it from a Western movie.
Yep. Johnny Ringo. And yep.
He's a character, man.
Yeah.
He is a hell of a character. I also didn't know he didn't do the voice in Yellow Submarine.
No, I don't. None of them did.
What? Really?
Yeah.
That was my first movie.
I know they were contractually obligated to write the songs, but they did not do the voices. They had some, and you wouldn't. I mean, even now, I think if you watch it, you're like, "Wow,
really?
It's not them."
Wow. Yeah. Well, I was 3, so I don't remember that well. Well, that's cool. Tell us some things you remember about. Now, I said you were with the Post since around the Dinkins administration. I think you actually came just after.
I started in 95.
Okay, so 95. But that was the idea. City was different back then.
Yes, the city was, even the Post was different. I mean, if you want to talk from a journalism print standpoint, I mean, we had a lot more staffers than we do now. Yes, the city was different. You had no email. Just from that point of view, we had no email with no internet. The city was going through a renaissance at that time. I mean, it was Giuliani was in office, and the crime was down, and
he was only in office about a year at that point. Actually.
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
So.
And we had a lot of the same problems we have now, but the city was a very vibrant time to be working in Manhattan. As you can probably say the same thing about Ed. Maybe if you were working in Manhattan, like in the mid 70s, when there were a lot of problems and garbage strikes and all that. In the mid 90s, a lot of that had not happened in a while. So it was a good time to be there. And Broadway was booming, and movies and television and all that kind of thing. So yeah, it was a good time to be in the city. Really was.
So you did grow up in northern New Jersey. What town?
Paramus, New Jersey.
Oh, you're in Paramus. Okay.
Yes, I grew up in Paramus.
So you were literally right in the shadow of the city.
Half hour away.
You came in a lot.
We did. I did. When I was younger, my parents, we went to see Broadway shows. My grandparents lived in the Bronx on the Grand Concourse, so we spent a lot of time there. I'm a big Mets fan, so spent a lot of time at Shea Stadium. And yeah, I mean, Manhattan was usually either going to dinner or to go to see a Broadway show.
What was it about this business that drew you into this as a career?
It's a good question. I've always been into sort of pop culture and the history of pop culture. I remember when I was a kid, I used to watch, I'm 60 this year, so I may be a few years older than you. So
there was
a show there was a show called Biography. Yeah. And it used to air, I think it was on Channel 11 on Saturday morning. I used to get up early to watch that. I loved that show, and it was newsreel footage and just of, Queen Elizabeth or, Babe Ruth or whoever it was. So I've always been interested in pop culture and the people creating pop culture, biographies. I actually started my journalism career. I was doing a lot of movie reviews at the time because I'm a huge movie buff. But TV to me was always, it still is to me much more accessible. And even the stars of TV shows, because there's so much product out there. And even when you had ABC, NBC, CBS. Okay, you only have 3 networks, but you had shows that were airing. They used to do 39 episodes a season. Now they do 22 if they're lucky, 13, maybe 9.
Right.
So you had these TV shows, they were like movies every week, hour long, even if they were hour long still, you're doing 39. Raymond Burr was doing 39 hour-long episodes of Perry Mason. Brutal workload.
Wow.
But so just there on your TV screen every week. And even with sitcoms, Joey Bishop had a sitcom in the Joey Bishop Show, but they were doing 30, it didn't last too long, but they were doing 39 episodes, or Gilligan's Island, or F Troop, or my favorite, Get Smart. They were doing a lot of episodes. So you felt like these people were part of your life. And maybe not so movies. Okay, maybe Jack Nicholson or Steve McQueen made 2 movies a year, maybe 3, perhaps. And they were big. Don't get me wrong. I mean, they were up there on the big screen. But when it's somebody coming into your living room, that you're sitting on your couch watching, or you're as a
every
kid,
week. It's like you're seeing your friend almost.
Exactly. And
you have to be there at the same time every week.
Yes. And it's right. Exactly. The Thursday at 8, it's Sanford and Son. It's a much more immediate connection. As a matter of fact, today I have a story in the paper today about the 40th anniversary of Hill Street Blues.
Oh my God. That might've been my favorite show ever.
Great cop show.
Yeah. Oh my God.
And
incredible.
If you're talking about comedies, I was a huge Barney Miller fan. Took place in New York.
I love Barney Miller.
Writing was terrific, but it was every week.
Yeah.
I think might not have been 39 at that point, but it was just so memorable. And you just got such a feel of New York City with the way these characters, Fish and Wojo and Barney and
best. Again, those characters are incredible. I mean, it made the whole story,
Yeah. I mean, and even going back to, there was a show called Naked City in the 60s, which I've seen a chunk of, not the whole thing, but it took place, it was filmed in the Bronx, took place in New York. So you had that New York feel, and sitcoms like Car 54, which was in the early 60s, which took place again in the Bronx, and has a very memorable theme song, by the way, naming all the boroughs.
Right. Yeah, I remember it.
But there's just, if you're going to talk about New York and television, you got to talk about these shows because they were so intrinsic. And I think even if people weren't from New York, like if they were in LA or Chicago, they got a sense of New York from watching these dramas and these comedies. Maybe it was an inflated sense of drama or an inflated sense of comedy, but still, I mean, Barney Miller, when you watch those, yes, it was a comedy, and they had, wacky people coming into the precinct, but it was very New York in its way.
Oh, it had a great flavor to it. You can taste that show.
Yeah.
You can smell that show.
And Hill Street Blues, while it wasn't, interestingly, they never identified the city.
Yeah, I think it was sort of understood it was Chicago, though, wasn't it?
Yes, exactly. Idea? It was Chicago.
But they didn't want to pigeonhole it.
Exactly.
Right.
But you see elements of New York in there, just in the lives of these police officers.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And the public defender, played by Veronica Hamill, and Farillo, brilliantly played by Daniel J. Travanti, who I interviewed for this article. He won 2 Emmys for that.
Oh, yeah.
And just the ensemble feel of that show, you could, it was New York.
It was incredible. I think it's hard for kids today, people in their 20s, to imagine a world where you couldn't watch anything outside of your TV room. Like TV rooms were, it was a foundation. It was something, there was an institution, a lot of sacred stuff goes on in that room.
I was in high school when Saturday Night Live came on, even if you wanted to talk about it the next day, you had to remember the lines or the sketches because you weren't DVRing it,
Right.
or VHS. It didn't exist then yet. It was sort of on the way. Or your favorite sitcom, or I Dream of Jeannie if you were, a little older and you wanted to talk about even late night, The Tonight Show. If you're watching Johnny Carson, you had to remember, if it was water cooler the next day, you had to remember, like, oh, what did Don Rickles say on the Carson show last night? It was great.
And you generally were able to remember it because it was the
Yes.
greatest line, and everybody's repeating it the next day.
Yes.
So it's like bouncing around the office. It's so true. We watched TV differently back then.
It was such a big part of our lives and so many other people's lives. And even if you weren't watching prime time, you were watching the evening news. If you weren't watching the evening news, you were watching the Today Show or something, or maybe you were watching everything, or you were just only watching shows at night, or you were only watching Carson when he started the show in New York, and it was an hour and a half. It was a lot of television.
Was it really? I don't remember.
It was 11:30 to 1 a.m. And then once he moved the show to California, and it became too much. So they cut it back to an hour. Yeah.
Wow. I don't remember it being an hour and a half.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Wow. That's incredible. I think it's really, important that somebody like you, Michael, who's running one of the major entertainment columns in New York, has this history, under your belt, has this experience behind you, that you really understand what the entertainment is made of and what it used to be made of. I mean, I think that's all part of telling the story. I think New York is extremely lucky to have you, and I hope you keep on doing it for a long, long time.
Thank you. I mean, I might know a lot, but I'm learning with everybody else about streaming and digital, and there's always information.
I sit down. Here's me watching TV these days. I go into the TV room like once a month. I grab one clicker that doesn't work, and then I start cursing. And I curse until Chance Jr. or my other son comes in and shows me how to even turn on the TV. Then once I turn on, it's a series of curses because we have 800 channels, and I have no idea what's on any one of them.
Right.
And then I just slam the remote down. I walk out, and I go read something.
How do you get to Netflix? Or I want to watch Amazon, or
so complicated.
this remote. And this
I
button.
tell them, I'm like, kids, you don't understand. We used to have a TV set. You turn on, there were like 7 channels, and that was it. And
right.
You watched what was there. It's a little different now. Well, and I just want to say, you really are an excellent author, and I hope you keep doing that. I hope that you still feel inspired in that way. And I know I could imagine what a Herculean effort it is, because I've done some writing, and it's a lot of work.
I am. I'm working on my next book is a biography of Don Rickles, which will be out next year.
God, I'm talking about like classic entertainers. When is that coming out?
Next year, 2022.
Excellent. And the most recent one before that is Ringo?
William Shatner was after Ringo. Shatner.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That came out last year.
Okay. But everybody of all the people we've named, Bobby Darin, Raymond Burr, Joey Bishop, Art Carney, Red Foxx, William Shatner, Ringo Starr, and Don Rickles, for God's sake. Get Michael Starr's books, folks. That he is a fabulous writer on some incredible characters. You'll love it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Me too. Well, Michael Starr, there is simply no doubt that you are an integral component of the incredible history of this incredible place. You continue to be that critical link between the world of glitz and glamour and the adoring public that wants to see those layers peeled back. And that's what you do for us. And as always, I'm extremely grateful to that special entertainment columnist who, for the record, welcomed our third child into this world in style, in the New York Post, in print, when Colton Kelly, August 17th, 2008, was welcomed into the world in the Starr Report, of all places. The one and only Coco Pazzo. I mean, for that alone, I can't help but love this guy. And I think it's a perfect reason for him to be the first news media writer professional to be on our program. We couldn't start with a nicer and more fitting guy. Michael Seth Starr, you are a true piece of New York history, and we thank you so much for sharing some of your spirit and insight with us. Bedankt, meneer.
Thanks, Chance. This was great. I appreciate it.
Okay, stay in touch. It's great to see you.
Okay, you too.
Look forward to talking soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Author and purveyor of the Starr Report, New York's own Michael Seth Starr, ladies and gentlemen. That was really fun, Michael. Thank you so much. Folks, in addition to finding Michael's column in the New York Post every week, as we posted on screen earlier, you can find all of his book titles at his website, Michael Seth Starr, with 2 R's, michaelsethstarr.com, or, of course, at all major booksellers. Folks, thank you so much for joining us, and if you're enjoying Island Voices on YouTube, please be sure to hit the red subscribe button on the bottom right of your screen to get every week's episode. Now, damas and herren, mesdames et messieurs, damas y caballeros, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to delve deeper into the history of Manhattan, the incredible history of Manhattan from 1609 to 1909, then you must join us for our primary podcast, Island, available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and all major podcast directories. Climb aboard. History is cool. Folks, we thank you so much for joining us, and we remind you to listen to the voices. They are the indelible echoes of the indomitable spirit of this incredible island. We'll see you next time.